So how do tax sales work in Indiana? Indiana, probably one of the more complicated states. So in this video, I'm going to break it down into 9 parts. So let's take it one step at a time. Make sure that you take some careful notes. I'll try to go kind of slowly so you can keep up with it. But I'm also at the end going to tell you a really simple way to do tax sales all across the country that might be better. But you want to understand about Indiana tax sales. I want to educate you on it because they can be great opportunities for people who know. If you don't know what you're doing, it's just a minefield and you're going to blow yourself up. So let's take it by breaking it down into 9 separate steps. So part 1, what kind of tax sales are there in Indiana? And Indiana is unusual in that there is more than one kind of tax sale. And that's not typical because in most states, the tax sales work consistently everywhere all across the state. But Indiana is a little bit different because there are actually 3 different kinds of tax sales that represent, of course, 3 opportunities, but they also represent 3 different sets of challenges for the investor that you need to understand in order to do this well. You have treasurer sales, you have tax commissioner sales, and you have tax deed sales. So those are 3 different kinds that you need to understand because, again, each one represents an opportunity. So treasurer sales have a 1-year right of redemption. Now, what does that mean? That means essentially that someone can come back, pay their taxes, and keep the property. Now, as an investor, you're going to do fine. You'll get your money back and some interest, and you'll do okay, but you're not going to get the property. And if your goal is to get properties, that may not be the auction that you want to go to, or at least understand you're going to be putting money out there on the street to buy these tax liens, and you're not going to get the property most of the time. The second ones are commissioner sales. Now, commissioner sales have a 120-day right of redemption. So in that sale, essentially they have 4 months to come back and pay the taxes. So in that sale, you might get the property, you might not. Most of the time, not. Anytime there's a right of redemption, for the most part, you don't get the property. And here's why. What happens is that when someone's house is actually struck down at auction, meaning there's an auction, there's a bidder, there's a guy with a paddle, there's that whole thing. When someone wins the property, that property owner hits the panic button because their house or the property is being lost and there's a deadline, there's a specific amount. So at that point, they're in full panic mode trying to raise money, doing whatever they need to do. Borrowing money from their friends and family, borrowing money from their boss, working some overtime. They're doing whatever they need to do to try to get that money together because they're faced with the loss of their house. So most of the time, people catch up at that point. That's just what they do. So when you're buying anything with the right of redemption, there's a very good chance that property is going to be redeemed, which means as the buyer at tax sale, you're not going to get the property. You get your money back plus some interest, which is all nice, but if you're using this as a property acquisition strategy, it's not going to work. Which brings me to the third method, which is the tax deed sales, which are held in parts of Indiana. Now, tax deed sales is when you get ownership of the property. So that's, if you're talking a property acquisition strategy, you really want to look for the tax deed sales because those are the ones where you're getting the property. You don't have to deal with waiting periods, with rights of redemption, all that. It's simpler to just go with the tax deed sales. And it works that way in many parts of the country. They just do tax deed sales where you get the property, there's no right of redemption, and you know you're getting it. So if it's an acquisition strategy, that's probably the one that you want to use and the sales that you want to focus on. And in the tax deed sales, there is no chance to undo that sale other than if they wanted to sue to undo it, which it happens sometimes. If that's you'll still, again, if that happens, you'll still get your money back. That's not so likely to happen. Instead, you actually do get ownership of the property because they give you a deed, which is why it's called a tax deed sale, because they give you the deed, which means ownership of the property. So if it's acquisition you want, tax deed's probably the place to focus. Part 2, let's talk about what the bidding process is, because again, Indiana is different than other places, more complex because again, you have 3 different types of sales. So really 3 different types of bidding processes. So the bidding is going to start at the amount of taxes that are owed. So that's where your bidding starts. And that's usually very cheap because typically things are a couple of years behind in taxes. Generally as a benchmark, and this is all across the country, you're probably 3 to 4 years behind in taxes before your property is actually being sold at the tax sale. And on average, taxes are a little less than 2% of the value of a property. So let's just round it to 2% so that we can understand it easily. If you're 4 years behind and your taxes are 2% of the property value, you're at about 8% of the property value for the minimum bid. there are going to be some penalties and interest, so let's just double it to cover that. So let's say you're at 16% of the property value as your minimum opening bid. That's pretty good if you had a $400,000 property, which is the average of a house in America these days. So $400,000, you probably have a tax bill that's about $8,000 a year. If you're 4 years behind, you're about $32,000 in principal, about $64,000 with penalties and interest. So imagine if you're buying a $400,000 house and the opening bid is $62,000. That's why these sales are worth going to, because that's where the bidding's starting. And sometimes you really will get lucky and get it for the minimum. And with the strategy I'm going to show you later, that is what you get it for. But let's stay focused on Indiana right now. So the bidding starts very low is the point. And then you bid up from there. Now, if you're talking tax deed sale, you're just going to keep bidding until the highest bidder gets the property. If it's the other sales where you're buying tax lien certificates, which are the commissioner's sales and the treasurer's sales, then you're bidding a premium above the taxes that are owed. And then you get interest on that money that you pay. So the interest specifically on the taxes, like the minimum bid portion, you're going to get a 10% interest rate on those. So that's great. 10% is a good rate. And then on anything you bid above that, called your premium bid, then you get a 5% interest rate on that. So, if someone redeems their certificate, which means that they undo the sale, so they come in before the right of redemption expires, they pay off the money that needs to be paid, then you're going to get 10% interest on your base bid and then another 5% interest on anything you bid above that, plus, of course, your principal back. So even if you don't get the property, you get some good yield. But I would just say when you're talking about the treasurer's sales and the commissioner's sales, expect to get the interest, not the property. If you're talking about tax deed sales, expect to get the deed because that's what you're going to get. So just understand that, and those are your interest rates. Now, these sales are held, some of them in person, and more they're being held online. The online is good and bad. So online is good in that you can just do it from the comfort of your house. You don't have to run out. It also opens up wider geographic areas where you can invest because you don't have to physically be there in order to go to the sale. So that's good. On the downside, a sale is more competitive when it has exposure where people can just bid on the internet. So that's simple. Both ones are worth doing. I wouldn't say not to do either, but just understand that's the way it works. And make sure with any of these sales that you register ahead of time. Often the registration closes well in advance of the sale. So when you're looking up these sales, make sure you find out what the bidder registration process and do that ahead of time. Do not be a last minute Larry or Jane with that because they'll lock you out of the sale. So make sure that you check that at the time you get the sale list. I talk about sale lists in other videos, so I won't talk about them here, but just make sure you register in advance. So part 3 to our little mini seminar here is what are your costs, what do you have to do, and what do you get back? So make sure that you hire a competent attorney to do what's called the servicing. What the servicing means is sending out notices on specific deadlines at specific times. Typically, the attorney is going to cost you $300 to $400, plus you have to get a title search for a couple $100. So those are your costs, and these things have to be done properly. T's have to be crossed, I's have to be dotted. Make sure that you hire an attorney to do that work for you. Now, you'll get the money back when they redeem. You'll get that $300 to $400 in attorney's costs per lien, but make sure that you do that because when you mess it up, you just lose the whole thing. You lose your entire investment. And also the timing is very important. After the redemption period expires, you have 3 months to apply for the tax deed. If you miss that window, you don't get the deed to the property and you lose your investment. So again, make sure you have an attorney who's going to be on top of this, doing everything properly. You will get that money back later if they redeem, or if they don't redeem, it's not enough money to clear your deal anyway, so it's fine. Part 5, there's something to look out for here, which is good and marketable title. Tax sale properties generally don't have what's called good marketable title. All that means is that you can't resell it to a retail buyer because the title company won't insure it. You either need to do a quiet title action, which is probably 6 months and about $3,000 to $3,500, or sometimes you can get a title certificate from a few of the title companies like Tax Title Services that offer that, where they'll insure the title anyway. Make sure that you're aware of that because these things, have issues like that. One of them is title. Make sure that you're budgeting that in. It's some time and it's some money. There are also some risks and challenges that don't exist in regular real estate investing. One thing is you don't get to see the inside of the property before you bid. So, they don't offer property tours or anything like that. So you're kind of bidding a little bit of a pig in a poke. So make sure you bid low because we need to make sure that you assume if they're not paying their taxes, they're probably not maintaining the property. So there's a leaking roof, it's probably still leaking and causing damage inside. So make sure you pay low prices. I personally would never pay more than 60% of retail for any tax sale property. just because I don't want to take the risk of a problem inside, and that they often do have bad shape. Also, you can have complications like IRS liens. They have 120 days to come and pay you and take the property. They usually don't, but it delays you 120 days. Municipal liens can survive. So if there's water or sewer or any municipal services that are due, those can survive. So you have to make sure you're aware of which ones you may still have to pay despite the property being sold at a tax sale. It will get rid of mortgages, so that's good. But you have problems like that, and you just need to sit down with an attorney, a local attorney who deals with these things on a day in and day out basis, and just go over the checklist of things that you need to worry about and how you can assess them before you go into any deal. Let's talk next about the strategy for doing this. Most important thing, evaluate physically and see physically each property that you're going to bid on, whether it's one where you're getting a lien or you're getting ownership of the property, because the lien is only as good as the property that supports it, meaning the property needs to be worth a lot more than a lien, because at the end of that lien, you could get the property and you've already invested your money and there's no refunds. And if it's a tax deed sale, you're going to get the property. So again, there are no refunds, there's no warranties in these things. Make sure that you set eyes on each property that you're going to buy. And that is a big part of this business. Some people will send out teams of people. Some people are just driving. Make sure that you do that part and do not buy things that you haven't seen. Next part, make sure that you get appropriate professional assistance. Do some Google searches for attorneys that help tax deed and tax lien investors in Indiana. You're going to find a couple of men and women that put articles out there because they're trying to attract that work. You need someone who specializes in this work. That's the only one who's going to be efficient enough and inexpensive enough and experienced enough to help you properly. And pay them for an hour or two of their time to sit down and say, hey, I'm going into this business. Can you give me the skinny of what I should be doing with these tax deed sales for due diligence? And how can you help me, and what are the costs? And finally, let me just give you the timelines for these various kinds of sales with when you can expect your investment to mature for you to have ownership and be able to do something with the property. For a standard, when you buy a property at a tax deed sale, assume it's about a year to get the property, have title for it, and be able to resell it, be able to refinance it, and have it as really productive part of your portfolio. Figure about 12 months. For a commissioner's tax sale that's not redeemed to convert into a deed, figure about 4 months. Plus then you have to clean up the title, so figure another 6 months to do that. So we're probably at 10 months on the commissioner's sale. Most of the time you won't get the property though, you'll just get paid off, but that'll happen within 4 months because they've got to redeem in that time period. And where you have to petition for a deed in either the commissioner's sale or the treasurer's sale, assume that petition process takes from 3 to 6 months to get through court. And then of course you still have to clean up title and put the property in production. Again, you're probably approaching close to a year for that property to go into productive service. And lastly, obviously this is a fairly complicated thing. You can do very well with it if you really focus on this business. If you want to do it the simpler way, there's a way to do these sales where instead of competing at a bid and instead of having anything where there's any kind of right of redemption, there's another way to do this. And I have a world-class expert, buddy of mine, that's been doing this since the early 1990s, been doing it forever. And he works all across the country. And he works at getting these sales just from catalogs of properties that are available by the tens of thousands. And literally just look through the catalog, pick the ones that you want, and you just buy them essentially for the taxes that are owed. And you don't need to worry about other liens because you can check those ahead of time. There's no competition. You don't have to go running around. Really good way of buying it. And I've recorded a video with him. It's about 20 minutes long. It's really fascinating, and he shows some of his deals, shows how this works. So I would say go check that out. It's my intro to the tax sales with Tony, and Tony is the guy. He is the world-class expert. I've been buying properties at tax sales, bought my first one in 1989, and I wish I'd known Tony's system back then. I would have been much richer, much faster had I known his system. So I wanted to give you a heads up. So go check that out. If you click on the link below, there's a link to my video with Tony. Just click on that. Spend 20 minutes. It'll be well worth your time. And definitely check out Indiana. Indiana's not bad. I've bought properties and tax liens in Indiana. I liked it. I did well with them. But it is quite a process. Tony's is simpler. It's safer. It's easier. So I would say that's an improvement over this. So hopefully this is helpful to you. This is Attorney Bob Diamond. Click on the link below. Go check out my video with Tony, and I will see you next time.